Oh, another edition of Tales from the Pump on 42nd Street, Pete's Grindhouse. And I have tried to figure out time frames of this whole thing, and it's impossible because shit just pops into my head now and then, just like the pickup truck story on the last one, because I was going to segue into Sunrise, Texaco. So now I'll segue into Sunrise, Texaco, because what happened, and I don't even know, fuck. I can't even think of the year, but I know that a lot of people weren't working, a lot of people were getting laid off, and Bernie and Steve kept me on, but I was mainly pumping gas and, basically not learning too much at that one point. So they decided they had to let me go. Of course, I'd been there long enough to collect on, get unemployment, but I think I don't know, you got to remember 70s money is a lot different than today. I think I might have been getting 3 and change an hour on the books. So when you knock off, there wasn't any state income tax back then, but SS and F, whatever the fuck it was, probably were walking away with maybe $2.50 an hour. So anyway, we had been doing business with Sunrise Texaco because the boss up there, Charlie Matthews, was an engine man. They did, heavy engine work where we didn't do heavy engine work. Like head gaskets and, head gaskets and shit like that, intake manifold gaskets and pulling engines out and rebuild them, whatever the fuck. Transmissions, things like that, hump work, really hump stuff. So I had, knew him through that, and there was 2 bars. The bar I used to go to was the Linford, which was rather sedate. It was old World War II guys and probably underage kids and some guys my age. Up the street was the Lyndhurst Lounge, affectionately known as the Zoo, where the bad boys hung out. And I had a go-go girl thing going on. Actually, one of the go-go girls actually doubled as a crossing guard in the morning, so it was kind of weird, but it was that kind of thing. So I had gone up there a couple nights and, seen Charlie and bought him a drink. He bought me a drink, so we knew each other. So Steve called him up and said, "Can you use this guy?" And Charlie goes, "Well, I can use him, but I'll pay him $2 under the table an hour." Okay. So basically, what I wrote myself into was 5 10-hour days, 50 hours a week at $2 an hour, which was $100 a week plus the $50 unemployment. Not the greatest of situations back then, but hey, it is what it is. But now I go from a place that has an automatic tire changing machine, air conditioned office, sort of like more modern shit, to the primitive end of it. 3 lifts, 1 of a drive-on, which we didn't have down there. No air conditioning in the office. The door would be open. No security except for 2 German Shepherds, junkyard dogs, Bobo and Princess. No automatic tire machine. Basically, it was all manual. You broke the bead with this tool. You shoved this 6-foot fucking bar underneath the lip and walked around and did all this shit. Well, in all honesty, it was something I wasn't used to. It was more hardcore and didn't know if I was going to fucking like this whole deal. But the thing was, when I left college, I was like 285 pounds. I was trying to get rid of the fucking weight, and this whole working and sweating it off and, hard physical labor was actually fucking good for me. Plus, Charlie was the head mechanic for Chrysler in New York at one point, and at one place. So he knew his shit and said he would teach me, but you're going to learn the hard way. In other words, in between pumping gas, which we didn't do a hell of a lot because Charlie didn't post any prices on the pump after the gas shortage. He was always 10 cents higher than anybody else, which would snag people after hours unaware, but it was what it was. The place was dimly lit after hours and on a corner of 2 intersecting exits, which basically you would hit Route 3 East, Route 3 West, 17 North, or 17 South. So shit could happen, and did. So anyway, he basically, okay, I want you to take apart that engine in that dump truck outside. I never fucking worked on a truck in my life. So I got up there and basically, started taking it apart piece by piece. He goes, we're rebuilding it. You just lay this stuff out as you take it off. So, a learning experience there. So, first night I was there, I said, well, what do I do with the cash at the end of the night? Because there's no fucking safe, there's no burglar alarm, there's 2 fucking dogs. He goes, bring it down to the zoo. I'm like, okay. So, go down to the zoo, of course. He's buying me a drink. Turk, the other guy who was working there, is buying me a drink. Dean, another guy who was working there, was buying me a drink. These are all hardcore drinkers. The place had an absentee owner because he was scared of the clientele. This other guy, Bobby Romanowski, tended bar. And I said, he goes, what are you drinking? I said, you got a tequila and tomato juice? And he goes, shot in a beer joint, kid, we don't have tomato juice. And I said, what if I bring it in? He looked at me and he goes, you're going to bring a can of tomato juice in? I said, yeah, I'm going down the street now and get one. So I walked down to the deli, bought a can of tomato juice, and he was like, okay, first one's on the house, and then, was drinking. So that's what sort of started my little alcohol issues back then, because it wound up that, after the fact, get off 11 o'clock at night. What do? You can go down to the zoo. Sometimes he'd be down at the zoo, or sometimes I have to drop it off at his house, which was the other way. So dropping it off at his house, I could, flip into the city and catch a movie, or go to the other bar. So it was kind of like this whole fucking catch-22 thing. I was getting roped into being out and getting hammered every fucking night for a lot of years. So, but I learned, and it was like, it was all hump work. It was different shit, and different things happened. But it was kind of fucking weird because, these guys would get out of there 5, 6 o'clock at night, sometimes 7 if it was over. They'd go right down to the bar, and then I was alone. And like I said, you got 2 guard dogs you kept in the office. You got 3 bays, that weren't alarmed. None of this shit was alarmed. And like I said, weird things happened at night. There was an Exxon station across the street from me. That was pretty well lit up and shit. But I think I told the story about hot TVs, the elusive hot TV, and how this guy, basically gave guys money up front to get TVs, and they never showed up, that shit. Just strange people would come in, all these, junkies driving around. They got like $3 in change to spend on fucking gas, and you wouldn't let them go into the office. That's why you had the dogs out there. Like I said, it was dark, it was dingy, but it did have certain perks. And as far as me losing weight, I got to the habit of making a big salad before I left the house and put it in a Tupperware thing. Because actually they had a soda machine that wasn't open to the public because it was full of beer. That was another thing, But there was a cooler in the back so I could put the salad back there. Plus there was a diner right around the corner I could walk to. Sometimes I'd grab some stuff from there because they have specials like, spaghetti and meatballs, goulash, beef stew, and you're talking like, with everything, like, $4 or $5 a meal. But when you're making $2 an hour off the books, you got to be a little frugal. So I'd hit there maybe 2-3 times a week, depending on what the specials were. Sometimes the specials were really fucking good. But I learned shit, and it was like you learn the hard way. Taking out transmissions. Like I said, doing hump work. I started to really like to work. I really liked to work on trucks. There was a lot of room. And it's sort of like, handed over my thing of like working on Cadillacs and Lincolns because there was a lot of room. Then you get 8-cylinder Mustangs where you had to take out the fucking battery to do the last 2 spark plugs. I mean, it was crazy shit, but I learned. I beat the fuck out of myself, but I learned. And then, going to the zoo every night, you encountered a whole cast of characters. And crazy shit that was going on. Because fuckers carried guns, some of them, especially Charlie. He did too. They were down there. One night we were down there, we were shooting pool, and somebody goes, "You guys better move, we're going to start shooting." I said, "What the fuck are you talking about? We're shooting pool." No, they had 22 automatics, and they were shooting the fucking light out over the pool table. I mean, this shit went on, and nobody said fucking anything. Guys were smoking weed right out in the open at the bar. On a Friday night, you go in there and people would be lining up, you put your quarter up to play pool and there'd be roaches on the fucking quarters and shit like that. It was nuts. It was like one of the craziest places I ever went to outside of New York. I mean, in New York, you expect weird fucking shit, not in, one of the local towns. But it was like Wild West up at that corner of town. It was really weird. And what was sort of good was there was another place, a worse place down the other end of town where most of the assholes stay down there and then you show up there. So we really had no problems. And like I said, Romanowski was the bartender. Sometimes he was behind the bar, sometimes he was in front of the bar. There was another guy, I think he was an ex-cop, his name was Gus. He was there. He was a lot of fun. But I got accepted into all that thing because I'd come down with Charlie, and we did some crazy shit in there too. One night this go-go girl was dancing and shit, and it like really got out of fucking hand. And I think I left, and then when I went to work the next morning, her top is tied to the winch of the wrecker, and her bottom's tied to the fucking fender. So I don't know what the fuck happened. A lot of crazy shit, but. Yeah, I was there for a while, and I got some, more stories about that. But that's our Tales for the Pump, and that's how I sort of left Getty and went up there. And then every 2 weeks, I'd have to take off, go down to East Orange, another wonderful fucking garden spot, and stand in line to get my $100 check for every 2 weeks. And then the other thing too was you had to have like places you went, you applied for a job. At least I don't know, it was maybe 5 places a week, I think, maybe back then. I don't fucking know anymore. But, I went to people that I knew that had businesses that weren't hiring, and they would, write it down and vouch for me and shit like that. And some places I'd go where they were hiring, but they weren't really hiring. So, like I said, there was something going on. It was some kind of fucking recession. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, that's all we got for today. So thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in. And above all, stay safe, and we'll catch you on the flip side.